our ailing and aging infrastructure, create jobs, and make sure that what we do here does not reduce the deficit by having those whose income exceeds $1 million pay a small little increase to pay for it. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, thank you. I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, yesterday we concluded our work here in the Senate on our version of the Agricultural Appropriations Bill. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee, a member of the Agricultural Appropriations Subcommittee, and I supported the legislation that we passed. But there is an outstanding issue at the Department of Agriculture that I was only recently made aware of. It's, to me, a very serious issue, which, given more time, I would have taken action here on the Senate floor. And it's an issue that I'll continue to pursue as a member of the Conference Committee as we work toward our final FY 2012 Agricultural Appropriations Bill. The issue involves a memo issued by the Department of Agriculture last month, October the 6th, authorizing the Department of Agriculture Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS, to conduct an animal welfare scientific forum. This forum was approved by Undersecretary Edward Avalos on October the 12th. And I'd ask unanimous consent to submit the USDA's memo for the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, thank you. The ironic thing about this forum is that there's little science involved. It is nothing more than, in my view, the Department of Agriculture spending taxpayer dollars on a forum to provide the Humane Society of the United States a public forum to espouse its anti-agricultural views. The document speaks for itself in this regard, and on page 2, the document states that APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, representatives believe that the Humane Society's intent is to promote and position the organization to be recognized nationally as influencing APHIS policy on critical and sensitive welfare issues. After reading that statement, it becomes clear that the Department of Agriculture is catering to an outside organization instead of relying upon the advice of animal scientists at our land-grant universities or even within the Department of Agriculture. If the Department of Agriculture was interested in science, why would it allow an animal rights organization to steer its agenda? Why wouldn't APHIS simply request the latest animal research from scientists across the country to make sure that its guidance is up to date? In addition to catering to HSUS, in planning this forum, the Department of Agriculture is precluding input from members of the agricultural industry it is supposed to promote. The memo states HSUS and other welfare advocacy groups would be invited to participate in a pre-planning meeting for the forum with senior leaders from wildlife services, animal care, and veterinary services. These groups would have input into the topics to be discussed, potential speakers for the topics, dates and times for the forum, how the forum should run, etc. That's quoting from the memo. No mention is made in the memo of asking any agricultural organization or animal scientist for pre-planning assistance. According to the memo, HSUS is going to set the agenda for this forum. Even if the agricultural industry is later invited to the event, agriculture would have the cards already stacked against them. I think it's important for most Americans to understand that HSUS is not your local animal shelter. HSUS is a national lobbying organization that spends most of its budget to lobby against farmers and ranchers that provide us with the food and clothing that we enjoy in this country. In fact, tax documents show that HSUS spends less than 1% of its budget on grants to animal shelters. Given these facts, you would have to wonder why the Department of Agriculture is giving this organization this platform and shunning producer organizations. This is one more demonstration that this administration is no real friend of rural America or the American farmer and rancher. My purpose this morning is to inform my fellow senators on what I consider this troubling development at the Department of Agriculture and to put the Secretary on notice that this type of conduct from the Department is unacceptable. The Department's mission statement reads like this: "We provide leadership on food, agriculture, natural resources, and related issues based upon sound public policy, the best available science, and efficient management. USDA should live up to its mission statement and work to promote agriculture, not to work against farmers and ranchers' best interests." And I would say not to work against the best interests of the consumer of food in this country. Going forward, I'll do my best to make sure that the Department of Agriculture adheres to its mission statement. Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I would again note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. just a few minutes ago, Senators Lieberman, Collins, Senator Scott of Massachusetts, and I gathered in the press gallery upstairs to unveil a proposed compromise that is designed to help us help ensure that we have a viable, strong, viable U.S. Postal Service in this country for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and longer. And, you know, there's been a lot of time spent in debate here over jobs, how we're going to save jobs, how we're going to create jobs in this rough economy that we're moving through. And as it turns out, there are about 7 million jobs that flow from the Postal Service. There's only about 500,000 people who actually work for the Postal Service these days, but there are another roughly 7 million jobs that are associated with the Postal Service in one way or the other. If we do nothing, the Postal Service, which lost $10 billion last year, is on track to lose a couple of $100 billion over the next 10 years. The Postal Service will literally go out of business next year. Not in 10 years, not in 5 years, but next year. That's a consequence that none of us can look forward to, and we need to provide predictability and certainty, and part of that is to make sure that we have a Postal Service that meets the needs of our businesses and the interests of our citizens. I want to say that the situation is dire, but it is not hopeless. This is one that we can fix, and the four of us have agreed on legislation that we believe will fix this problem, not 5 years, not 10 years from now, but literally provide the fix that's needed this year. I mentioned at our press conference that a couple of years ago, my sister and I went to the home of my parents. My parents are now both deceased, but we went to their home and we rooted through all kinds of nooks and crannies and boxes and attics and so forth. And we came across a treasure trove of letters that they exchanged during World War II. They wrote to one another. When my dad was overseas, they wrote several times a week. Now, they saved the letters. Saved the letters. When I was in Southeast Asia back during the Vietnam War, the happiest day of the week for us was the day the mail came. The letters, the postcards, the birthday cards, the packages that we received, the magazines, the newspapers. That was really the best day of the week. When our presiding officer and I go on a Codel to Afghanistan or to Iraq to visit our troops and see how they're doing and what we need to be doing, they still get the mail over there. But it's not like it was when I was serving, when my dad and my uncles and were all serving. Troops today, they communicate with their families back home with Skype. They have the ability to use these cell phones. They have the Internet, they have Facebook, they have Twitter. You name it, it's a different game today. Different game today. And as the way that we communicate in this country and this world has changed, the Postal Service needs to change the way they do business, and they're ready and anxious to do just that. I think there's a good analogy here in trying to figure out what the Postal Service needs to do to right-size its enterprise. It's a good analogy that we can draw from by looking back just 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, the situation that the U.S. auto industry was in this country. Let's think about this. In 1970, my first trip to Southeast Asia, the market share of Ford, Chrysler, GM was just about 85% here in this country. 85%. 2009, their market share dropped to less than 50%. And the auto industry reported to us and to the rest of the country that they had, given the market share they enjoyed in 2009, they had more employees than they needed. They had more auto plants than they needed. And there was a mismatch in terms of the wage benefit structure. They were paying their own employees versus the wage benefits they were being paid to their competition selling cars, trucks, and vans in this country. They asked from us a bailout, not exactly a bailout. They asked for a cash transfusion. They promised to pay it back with interest. And lo and behold, they have. And 3 years later, Ford, Chrysler, and GM are still in business. They have fewer employees than they had 3 years ago. They have fewer auto plants than they had, but they've changed up the wage benefit structure and made some changes in their health care costs and the way they administer health care costs, which are now overseen by the United Auto Workers. And as I said earlier, the monies that we invested in those two companies, Chrysler and GM, those monies have been repaid largely with interest. The Postal Service in 2011 is in a situation not unlike where our auto industry was a couple of years ago. Given their market share, the U.S. Postal Service has more employees than they need. The Postal Service has more post offices than they need. They have more processing centers around the country than they need. And what they would like to be able to do is not to fire employees, not to abrogate labor contracts. What they've asked to do is to be able to do what the auto industry did working with their workers, and that's to incentivize people at the Postal Service that are eligible to retire to go ahead and retire. There's about 125,000 of them. And we've seen the Postal Service headcount drop from 800,000 employees a decade ago to about 600,000, a little under 600,000 today. And the Postal Service feels they need to be able to reduce that headcount by another 100,000 or so over the next couple of years by incentivizing the retirees, people eligible to retire, to go ahead and retire. And by doing that, the Postal Service, they think they can do that for about $2 billion. $2 billion. By doing so, if 100,000 postal employees will retire, they're eligible to retire, it will save the Postal Service, get this, $8 billion a year going forward, $8 billion a year. Last year, the Postal Service lost $10 billion. And in the years to come, they're projected to lose about $20 billion. But we could literally address about half of that financial challenge just with one fell swoop. Incentivize retirees, retiree-eligible employees to go ahead and retire. Postal Service is interested in being able to close some post offices. They like to be able to consolidate some post offices where they have two, make one. In some cases, they like to be able to take the services that they provide at a post office and offer them at maybe a retail outlet that's open more than 6 days a week, or maybe a retail outlet that's open 24/7. Put the postal services maybe in some supermarkets in communities across the country. Put them in some convenience stores or maybe in pharmacies. The idea wouldn't be to provide worse service. The idea to actually provide better service in a lot of instances. There are 33,000 post offices in the country. The Postal Service is looking today at 3,700 of them to try to decide whether or not they are viable. Under current law, the Postal Service can literally go in and close a post office. They can't do it for solely on economic grounds, but they can go in and close a post office pretty much at their volition and maybe have a cursory conversation with the community, but not much. The legislation that we have proposed would say that the post office, as they look at these 3,700 post offices that are under review and others that perhaps in the future, that before they go about closing any of them, the Postal Regulatory Commission, which is responsible for setting service standards for the post office, the Postal Regulatory Commission would have to be part of that decision-making process in these communities across America and make sure that the service standards, the Regulatory Commission, the regulators, if you will, for the post office, that their service standards that they've established are going to be met in the future if a post office is closed or post offices are consolidated or the services are co-located. This has to be a transparent process where the folks who live and work in those communities have the opportunity to be full participants in that decision-making. And with respect to the closure of mail processing centers, there's over 500 of them across the country. The Postal Service would like to close maybe as many as 300 of them. But under the legislation that we've proposed, again, there would be the opportunity for communities, businesses, small and large, postal customers, residential customers, and others, to have the opportunity to make clear whether or not the closure of a mail processing center in their town, their community, would somehow inopportune to the real detriment of that community in ways that are not fair. So those are really three things that the Postal Service wants to be able to do: address their headcount needs, take a close look at how many post offices we have and whether or not those services can be provided in a more cost-effective way. And the third, to look at the 500-plus mail processing centers that we have and try to figure out how many of those can be closed. The Postal Service today delivers mail from my state to the presiding officer state in Minnesota. That mail letter day, he'd probably get it out there on Friday or maybe Saturday. The standard of service today is, in some cases, next day service. In some cases, service can be as much as 3 days. What the Postal Service has asked is they'll still be able to do some one-day service, but they would like for the standard to be officially 2 to 3 days. And that's one of the things that they're asking for the opportunity to do, and our bill lets them do that. The other thing that the Postal Service has asked for is some relief, if you will, not a bailout, but not taxpayer dollars, but some relief with respect to their health care costs. Currently, the Postal Service pays into Medicare for its employees. They're the second largest payer into Medicare of all the employers in the country. And they also pay in something called the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan. So you have the Postal Service sort of paying twice for health care service for its retirees, people 65 and over. They're largely eligible. 85% of them are eligible for Medicare. And if they're not, then they're still eligible for the Federal Employee Health Benefit benefits as retirees. And the Postal Service is asked to do what a lot of other companies do. And what a lot of other companies have asked to do is to be able to, for those folks who are eligible for Medicare, Medicare would be their primary source of health care coverage. And in addition to that, the Postal Service would provide a Medigap plan to fill the gaps that are less that Medicare does not cover. And we think that's a reasonable request. We've also given the Postal Service the opportunity to negotiate with their labor unions to see if it might make sense for the Postal Service to withdraw from the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan and establish their own plan for roughly a million people. And they'll have a chance to study that and decide whether or not that makes sense. I'll mention maybe three other things that we believe the Postal Service can do to reduce costs. One of those is the way they deliver the mail. For a lot of folks in my home, the mail is delivered to our front door. There's a mailbox right by our front door. And what we're suggesting in our legislation is that in some cases the Postal Service looks, is that an efficient way to deliver mail? Or maybe it's curbside delivery just fine. If somebody has a mailbox, the letter carrier puts the mail in the mailbox, doesn't have to get out, park the vehicle, walk up to the house, put it in the mailbox, walk back to the vehicle, and a fair amount of money can be saved there. There's money that can be saved in the way that workers' comp is handled for postal employees, and we also believe for federal employees. The President agrees, and we put legislation there in this bill there too. In addition to finding ways to save money, I'd also hasten to add, it's important for the Postal Service to find new ways to make money. New ways to make money. We've all seen the TV ads about flat rate boxes. If it fits, it ships. And the price is pretty good, and the service is pretty good too. That's the kind of idea, the kind of creativity we need more of from the Postal Service. The Postal Service has a partnership with FedEx and UPS. Most people think of them as competitors, but actually the Postal Service is a good partner with both FedEx and UPS. And how's that? FedEx and UPS don't want to deliver to every door in America every day or 6 days a week. They don't want to do that. And they simply ask the Postal Service to deliver to those doors that FedEx and UPS don't want to deliver to on a particular day. And the Postal Service makes money doing this. They make a lot of money doing this. And in the holiday season comes upon us, we're going to find that there's a need for a lot of people going to not just go to brick-and-mortar stores to buy their holiday gifts, but they'll want to order online, and Postal Service can participate broadly in that business too. Last thing I want to mention is this. And in addition to making money, we've got to come up with new ideas. Those are a couple of ideas that work. There are others. And we're looking for ways to save money at state and local government. Why not consolidate some of your operations in post office buildings? Really. You have a couple more tenants and provide service there for other purposes. We do that for passports. Why don't we do it for some other things? We're going to start hearing a lot about virtual mailboxes in the days to come, and whether or not that might be a new piece of business for the Post Office to be involved in as well. Let me close by saying this. I think as we go forward on this process, we need to invoke and be mindful of the golden rule, to treat people the way we would want to be treated. That includes customers of the Postal Service, be they businesses or individuals, residential customers, employees of the Postal Service, other stakeholders, the taxpayers. We need to treat everybody the way that we would want to be treated. And the last thing I'd say is my friend from Tennessee standing up, we're two people here who believe that we ought to be serious about solving big problems, as is the presiding officer. And there are a lot of folks in this country who think that we're incapable of dealing with big challenges these days. This is a big challenge. Postal Service is one of the two largest employers in this country. And the consequences of the Postal Service going down next year are not what we want to see visited on this country. 7 million jobs would be in jeopardy. If we just simply try to put this on autopilot and let the taxpayers pay for it, it's over $200 billion more hit on the Treasury. This is a big challenge. This is one we can fix. And to the extent that we can pull together as a body here in the Senate what we've done in our committee on this issue, we'll set a good example, I think, for our nation to say, yeah, we can still govern. We can still take on a tough problem, and we can fix it. Not a year or two or three from now, but this year. With that having been said, I yield the floor to my friend from Tennessee.
Mr. President,
Senator from Tennessee.
I know we're in rotation right now. What I thought I might do is yield just a couple minutes to Senator Blumenthal, if that's okay, and then let him yield back to me, if that would be okay. But I do want to thank the Senator Carper, for his leadership on this issue. We've looked at his bill and others, and we're glad that they've been able to come to an agreement between each other. And obviously, as I go back home, the issue of the Postal Service is one of the big issues that we need to deal with. I agree with you. I think that's something we can do now, and I thank him for the leadership. And with that, Mr. President, if it's okay, I'll yield back to my friend.
Without objection, Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Senator Corker for very graciously beginning this discussion. I want to join in thanking the very distinguished senator from Delaware for all of his hard work and very successful and insightful work and discussion this morning on a problem that really concerns all of us very, very deeply and immediately, and his leadership has really been an enormous contribution to the nation on this issue. And I'm pleased to be here today with Senator Corker to discuss a problem that is really spreading across the country. It is a public health threat to our troops, our children, our frail, our elderly, involving the spread of mutant germs, so-called superbugs, that are resistant, sometimes even immune, to existing antibiotics. And I have been very proud of the work that Senator Corker and I have done together. He has joined me, and we have been joined by Senators Bennett, Hatch, Casey, Alexander, Coons, Roberts here in the Senate, and by Representative Gingrey and DeGette in the House, along with a very bipartisan group of respected members there on an issue that's truly bipartisan. And I want to yield to him to discuss and then continue my conversation about it on an issue that really ought to concern us very, very closely and immediately, because reports from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention suggest that these infections are not only prevalent in permission but spreading across the country. I will have a more detailed set of charts that show that problem, and he and I have developed what I think is a solution that the Congress can take in order to provide incentives for development of new antibiotics, new medicine that can help the nation prevent the spread of these kinds of diseases. So with that, I would yield to the distinguished senator from Tennessee.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure you're getting a little dizzy going back and forth here. Thank you. But I want to thank my friend from Connecticut, and I know he's mentioned the senators who joined us in this effort and the House members on the other side in a bipartisan way. But I first want to thank him for his leadership on this and for approaching our office about this issue. I know that the public watches Washington and wonders if there's ever anything that's done in a bipartisan way. There are actually lots of efforts that are undertaken in that way, and I'm very glad to be working with him and his staff. They've been very professional, and hopefully this bill can become law. The problem is that we have this drug resistant bacteria called superbugs. All of us have read and heard about them. They're becoming harder and harder to treat because we lack the new antibiotics capable of combating these infections. It's actually scary when you think about what's happening in many facilities across our country. And so it's obviously crucial that we find new antibiotics that are discovered so that we can stay ahead of this growing trend of drug resistance. Drug discoveries obviously don't happen overnight, and action is needed now to ensure that we have access to these life-saving medications when we really need them. These are serious infections. They are definitely life-threatening to the patients, especially children and the elderly. In fact, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has named these antibiotic resistance as one of the top public health concerns in our country. According to the Infectious Disease Society of America, 100,000 deaths and 360,000 hospitalizations result from antibiotic-resistant infections each year in the U.S. In my state of Tennessee, nearly 2,000 cases of MRSA are reported annually. MRSA is a common and very dangerous type of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, often found in the hospital setting. And again, all of us know of cases, I'm sure, where this has happened to loved ones, friends, and others. The financial impact of these infections is also staggering, costing our healthcare system $35 to $45 billion annually. This problem is also threatening the health of our troops abroad. One particular type of bacteria, known as Iraqibacter, is striking hundreds of wounded soldiers coming back from Iraq. Since 2003, more than 700 U.S. soldiers have been infected or colonized with this life-threatening bacteria. While bacteria infections continue to become more resistant to traditional antibiotics, the innovation of these new antibiotics capable of combating these infections have slowed at an alarming rate. FDA approval of these new antibiotics has decreased by 70% since the 1980s. Between 2003 and 2007, there were 5 new antibiotics approved by the FDA compared to 16 new antibiotics from 1983 to 1987. What this bill does, the GAIN Act, provides meaningful market incentives and reduces regulatory burdens to encourage the development of these new antibiotics that will help us save lives and reduce health care costs. Specifically, and I really appreciate the way the senator from Connecticut has approached this, specifically the bill provides 5 additional years of exclusivity to new drugs developed to treat these superbugs. The bill also gives these antibiotics priority status during the FDA review process so that they can move more quickly through, and encourages the FDA to revisit their clinical trial guidelines for antibiotics. By encouraging a more robust antibiotic pipeline, we can help ensure that patients have access to life-saving treatments while also reducing health care spending. The GAIN Act is a straightforward, common-sense bill that provides market incentives to encourage innovation without putting federal dollars at stake. Antibiotic resistance is a growing issue that we must address now to properly prepare for the future. Dr. William Evans, the director and CEO of St. Jude's Children's Hospital in Tennessee, recently wrote a letter supporting this bill, and all of you know of St. Jude's and the wonderful work that they do for children across our country. Here's his quote: "We don't want to find ourselves in a situation in which we have been able to save a child's life after a cancer diagnosis only to lose them to an untreatable, multi-drug resistant infection." I'd like to thank my colleague again, Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, for his leadership on this bill, and I look forward to working with him to ensure it gets proper consideration in the Senate. I'd also, Mr. President, like to ask for unanimous consent to submit letters of support into the record from the following organizations: St. Jude Children's Hospital, Le Bonheur Children's Hospital, University of Tennessee Health Sciences Center, East Tennessee State University, Quillen College of Medicine. With that, Mr. President,
Without objection.
Thank you. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor to my good friend, someone who I've thoroughly enjoyed working with on this issue, and thank him again for this leadership on a very important issue that matters to all of us. Thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, my thanks to my very distinguished colleague from Tennessee, whose leadership and contribution to this bill has really been instrumental from the very start, and I've really welcomed and been thankful for his partnership on this issue. As he has said so well, these antibiotic-resistant drugs are really a spreading scourge. The reports from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention suggest that MRSA infections are responsible for more than 17,000 deaths in the United States every year, more than AIDS and many other diseases that are regarded as public health threats. And all 50 states have seen rates of antibiotic-resistant E. coli infections double in less than 10 years. A lesser-known bug, Acinetobacter, a bacterium that affects increasing numbers of our troops serving in Iraq, has infected more than 700 of our service members since 2003, and the numbers are continuing to rise. Those numbers are alarming, and I have some charts that I'm going to show in just a moment that will be even more graphic than the numbers, but to put a human face on this problem. Jamel Sawyer, a former college football player from Norwalk, Connecticut, knows all too well the crippling impact of these antibiotic-resistant infections. He was in school in Boston, suffered from severe back pain, a rising temperature, went to the hospital, and was told that he was suffering from this kind of antibiotic staph infection, an antibiotic-resistant infection, which really surmounted multiple rounds of antibiotic treatment. He was left paralyzed and unable to walk, and he was paralyzed from the waist down, remains very severely handicapped as a result. And right now he is fighting to gain back his ability to walk and function normally. We are in an arms race with superbugs. We are in a fight with antibiotic-resistant mutating germs that are a spreading, persistent, and pernicious problem all around the country. The resistance is fueled by careless use of antibiotics, the kind of overuse of certain kinds of antibiotics or failure to use them properly, as when they are not used for the full round when they should be, and thereby lead to greater resistance on the part of these germs. The failure to use these antibiotics properly, the failure to exercise good stewardship is important, but it is not the only cause. We need to stay ahead of these germs in an arms race to develop new antibiotics and provide incentives for those antibiotics. The kind of problem that we encounter is shown by these charts, first beginning in the year 2000 with antibiotic-resistant E. coli. As this chart makes clear, nowhere in no state in the United States was there a rate above 10%. That accounts for the white to yellow pattern, light yellow pattern here. In 2009, the situation was very different. In states across the country, major states, including New York and the entire East, the rate was above 35%. And in many parts of the Midwest, including the President's state of Wisconsin, the rate was above 25%. E. coli resistant to treatment by this commonly used antibiotic presents a threat particularly to our children and our elderly. The next chart I want to show concerns Acinetobacter. This bacteria has afflicted particularly our troops coming back from Iraq. It is, in fact, nicknamed Iraqtobacter by many military doctors, and it has literally jumped enormously. This was the case in the year 2000. Almost everywhere, rates below 5%. And the present incidence is very, very different, alarmingly so. In some states, above 50%, including, I believe, New Mexico. In many parts of the East, above 30 to 40%. This kind of Acinetobacter incidence is really something that is a major national security problem insofar as 700 troops have been infected with Acinetobacter, and as Robert Johnson, the director of Military Families United, said so eloquently about this disease, and I'm quoting, "The worst part is that many of our men and women in uniform survived the war effort only to return and die of this infection in the continental United States. Thus, Military Family United strongly supports the GAIN Act, which would ensure that American companies have the motivation to combat the most modern, multi-drug resistant diseases." I brought these charts simply to show how the spread of these superbug infections has really affected the entire United States. There are other diseases like MRSA and VRSA. They are a set of acronyms that are comparable to, in effect, a modern plague. Fully a third of all deaths from H1N1 swine flu, for example, in 2009 were actually caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria. According to the Infectious Disease Society of America, 100,000 deaths and 360,000 hospitalizations in the United States resulted from antibiotic-resistant infections at a cost of $26 billion to our health system annually. What's the reason for the rise and spread of these diseases? Well, the main reason is that we don't have new antibiotics to treat and cure them. And the reason for that dearth of new antibiotics goes to the fundamentals of modern economics involving the drug industry. Antibiotics are prescribed and used for a course of 2 weeks if they work. There are blockbuster drugs and miracle drugs that are used for the treatment of chronic disease and therefore are used often for lifetimes. The revenues from those blockbuster drugs are themselves blockbuster products and profits. And the problem with antibiotics is the lack of economic incentives to develop them in modern economics, the modern economics of the pharmaceutical industry. The GAIN Act would remedy that problem. It would incentivize the development and research required to implement and discover these new drugs. It would extend the data exclusivity rights for 5 years. It would speed and expedite consideration of these drugs by the FDA. It would provide a fast track, essentially, and enable prompt review. Moderate and eliminate the kinds of regulatory hurdles that are so important in providing not only incentives but also a track to consumers so that they would have the availability of these drugs. I personally would welcome other ideas, if there are any, for strengthening the incentives for development of these antibiotics that are so important to treat and cure the antibiotic-resistant germs that cause these problems. I hope that we will continue to have the kind of bipartisan momentum in favor of these new developments. And I would just close by saying we're all talking about jobs on the floor of the United States Senate these days. This proposal is also, in a way, a jobs-related program. It would enable small innovators and small businesses. One is, for example, Rybex Pharmaceuticals in New Haven, a 50-person company trying to develop new drugs through innovation. And the kind of boost and incentive that this bill will provide is very important for the innovators of America who are out there trying to provide cures for Acinetobacter, MRSA, E. coli, all of them superbugs, providing a solution to this problem that I think is very much urgent and in the interests of our nation. This measure is a first step. I hope we can come together to enact it, and I urge the United States Senate to join me in doing so. And before yielding the floor, Mr. President, I have 6 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these